name is Kurt Thomas. I'm here with my colleague, Mr. George Hibbler. There you are, George. Thank you for joining us for a session of Zero Trust on IBMI, what it is, why it matters for you. All right. We are with Fortra. I think you have heard of us before. We're very happy that you made the decision to join us. We think we have something worth your while. So let's get right into it. We'll start. And if the recording hasn't been started, please start it now. We have behind the scenes our wonderful colleague, Miss Elizabeth Altenberg, who is going to be doing us the honor of making sure that I don't trip over myself. And the two people that you have on screen here, strangely, the guy on the left had darker hair when this photo was taken. So that's me, Kurt Thomas or Kurt Thomas. I'm a senior system engineer with Fortra and also wear the hat of the technical product manager. First brush with the IBMI or the ACE400 in 1995 and based out of Bonn in Germany. So much for me. George, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, morning, folks. I'm George Hibbler. I'm a solutions architect with Fortra in the data protection division. I'm happy to be here with Kurt to talk about some of our experiences that we've got in the zero trust arena here in the United States. Briefly about me, I started with IBM COBOL programming and what have you back in about 1985. So I've got a little bit of experience, but I went over to the dark side probably in 95 to do small end systems like PCs and things. But I currently work in the data protection division. We'll talk about some of the things we're doing with zero trust.
Yeah. George, were you with Titus previously? Because I see that on your shirt there a little bit. Is that true?
Yeah. I've spent 8 years with Titus before we were acquired by Fortra. And, a long history. It's too long to spend on this call for other companies.
Okay, folks, you deserve to see some content. Thank you, George, for the introductions. And I'll turn off my camera so as not to distract anyone. And we will proceed. And by the way, if you are not seeing these slides, you should be seeing the presenter slide. Let us know through the chat feature. Any questions also, please take them to the chat. Okay, so very briefly about Fortra, right? We are featured in 22 of the top 25 Fortune 500 companies. Let me summarize this as follows. We have the big luck to have customers in many different areas, pretty much on all continents. So I'm not 100% sure about Antarctica, okay? We love it that you love us. We want to grow this even more. Let's get on with the content. All right, so the goal of today's session is to get you started or to allow you to get started with implementing zero trust in IBMI, right? Now, we're not presenting a turnkey solution, right? Our goal today really is to plant the seeds, right? To give you ideas, some pointers about what can be done with concrete examples. Do feel free to ask questions during the presentation or afterwards. We'll try to answer them if we can during the session, if not after the session. So just a few reasons why zero trust would matter to you, right? Number one, the IBMI runs business critical applications. Otherwise, you would not be having an IBMI, right? It matters to you. So that's a very good reason you want to protect that. Number two, across the entire IT landscape, cyber risk is going up, okay? Rising tide lifts all boats kind of things. Cyber compliance is becoming more important indirectly as a result of this. So things like GDPR, NIS2, SIS, DORA, PCI, SOX, all of those play a role for increasing number of companies. And then on the plus side, zero trust can help you to reduce risk and improve compliance. Right. So this is our agenda for today. We'll talk about the principles beyond zero trust. We'll talk about an application or ways to apply zero trust principles on the IBMI, right? We'll talk about what you should be avoiding when implementing zero trust in IBMI. That's going to be a short chapter. And then we'll talk about, in essence, it's a summary of what can be done on the IBMI, featuring Fortra solutions, and also outside the IBM, which also matters indirectly for your IBM landscape, right? Let's take it away. So let's talk about the zero trust way. What is zero trust? The first thing I'll tell you is it's a set of principles. It's not a single tool that you can just, turn on and everything is zero trusted, right? It's not a single process either. All right. Now, history of zero trust, just to put this into a bit of context, it started, as far as we know, in 1994, where Mr. Stephen March, writing his PhD thesis, originally coined the term zero trust, right? And then for some time, not much happened. And then the Jericho Forum, which was a group of CISOs, basically, came together, discussed the concept of deperimeterization, which is really central to zero trust, okay? Getting rid of the perimeter as security concept. In 2009, that has developed. Google implements zero trust at scale in their Beyond Corp architecture. That was a big stepping stone in the industry. It's like, oh, Google does it at this scale, then it should be interesting. Okay. Then in 2010, Mr. John Kinderberg, Forrester Research, publishes paper that has the term zero trust in it, and then popularizes that term widely. 8 years pass, US NIST publishes a guideline, zero trust architecture, to using zero trust, and the US Army starts to adopt zero trust for its military academy. 3 years later, it starts to adopt zero trust for its IT in general. Okay, so, okay, George, do you want to do this one here, the zero trust way?
Sure, I can do that. So the zero trust increased security risk, assumed breach, remote work, distributed organizations. That's what our customers are facing, and I'm seeing that out in the industry itself. It's the opposite of the perimeter defense. We trust nobody on the inside. And a good example of that is when I work with some of our classified networks, customers in the DoD and things like that, they're compartmentalizing the information you often hear in the news, SDI, and a lot of those 3-letter acronyms, secure, compartmentalized information and things like that. Zero trust is a lot of interest to them because they may have groups of people that are working on various projects in certain times of day, or depending on what computer systems they're on, that determines what material they're allowed to access. So there's a huge amount of interest in that. And it's not just protecting from the outside. These guys are already protected from the outside. In is trusted by default. That's no longer the case, particularly in those environments. So we're seeing that migrate out into some of the commercial customers I deal with, which would be large banks and things like that. It's zero trust came up in conversations with large banks probably about 6 or 7 years ago on how we could implement that, and not only build a castle, but protect folks from inside the castle from getting to the crown jewels and things like that. The initial focus was on network segmentation and authentication, and that's parts of the pieces. We'll kind of build this puzzle out as we go forward in probably I'll call it the more mature model now, what we're seeing in the industry. And Kurt's got a good term there, limit the blast radius. So when you do get in, it's not easy to go from A to B, and we'll kind of demonstrate how that works out.
Yeah, thanks, George. So, these are just some concepts to get us started on the way, and specifically speaking about this idea of limiting the blast radius through things like network segmentation. Okay, let's assume that you have an important server somewhere in your network, within your assets, right? And this is exemplified by all of these squares here. And let's say that somebody is able to break into one of your systems, right? And then they would do what's called lateral movement. So they try to go from system to system to eventually get onto your important server that has all the juicy data or juicy functionality, which this attack is after, right? So they try to hop from system to system to get to that one server, right? Olympus has fallen in that sense. So they have made it to the server. Now, if you are duly following a zero trust approach, right? Then what you should have as a result is, yes, people may still get in, they may even get to that important server, but that is contained, right? So they would not be getting to other important servers that would be in your network, okay? That's the idea, or they would have to make a big effort to do that, right? If you don't follow that kind of approach that seeks to minimize the damage to contain the blast radius, right? You'll end up with this. So everything has been hacked, basically. Okay, and this is one of the aspects of one of the goals of zero trust. Okay, we know you're always interested in some proof, some empirical data. So I include this here. Here's an example of the kind of network hardening that you would perform under zero trust, right? So this is from a very recent paper by Mrs. Utrani Agarwal and Dott. Does subnetting and port hardening influence human adversarial decisions, right? And they basically harden a network in this manner that it just sketched out there, right? Network hardening based on ports, source, target IP addresses, and they checked, would that influence the behavior of attackers? And sure enough, they found that human attackers were deterred as soon as they realized that these systems had been network hardened. Yeah. So just an example that this kind of stuff works. Feel free to Google this, and of course you'll be able to see this in the recording. Right. Now, two concepts that are very important in zero trust are authentication authorization. Two basic security concepts. Authentication answers the question, who is this, right? Example on the IBM. If you want to sign on to an interactive session, you as the user, in most cases, have to provide credentials for a profile, which is the representation of your identity on the system, okay? So that's authentication. Who is this, right? Then a separate thing, but related, is authorization. And that answers the question, what is this process allowed to do at this point in time? So IBM example, is this job right now allowed to delete these records in this file, right? That's a decision that DB2 has to make at that point in time based on various things. So what is the relationship between authentication, authorization? Well, authentication provides identity, and identity is one important input for authorization decisions. Not the only one, of course, but it's one important one. So authentication delivers identity, and identity is a critical piece of authorization decisions, what should be allowed. Depending on the kind of action that is requested, other things play a role here: the object, the program, the action type, special authorities of the user profile, special authorities inherited from the group profile of the user profile, and so on. Right? So all of these things, different things can play a role, but obviously which user profile is requesting that is a very important piece of information. All right, and to briefly compare the classic perimeter defense way to zero trust, right? With the perimeter defense, you have an authenticate once on entry, quote unquote, right? With zero trust, you authenticate more often. You authenticate after initial authentication again. Okay, perimeter defense, there is actually outside and inside, and the inside is always good and trusted. Okay, that's where the term zero trust really comes from. So with zero trust, there is no clear outside or inside, or if there is, then it's ignored for authentication or authorization. Right? Perimeter defense is ultimately a reflection of the physical security. Right? You're inside the building, hence you're good. Reflecting the typical state in the old days of working from a physical location that is part of the company. Zero trust is a better reflection of today's distributed and hybrid working environments. Right? Perimeter defense, you have a single checkpoint. Zero trust, you have multiple checkpoints. You have typically defense in depth, so multiple defensive mechanisms. You want to limit the blast radius if something comes in. So you assume that, yes, you may be breached. Okay, Now here's a bigger picture of the zero trust principles. There's quite a number of them. So you want network segmentation, something called overlay networks, software-defined perimeters, and so on and so forth, right? That is quite a lot. Now, there is actually more to that, right? If we want the full picture, this is provided by the US Department of Defense. Thank you, US Department of Defense. This gives you even more information, right? That is, we realized, quite a mouthful, and also not everything in here would apply directly to the IBMI. Yeah. So what we did for the purposes of this webinar here is we made a very strong sub-selection of this. Okay, and what we're going to focus on is ways on the IBMI to improve authentication and to improve authorization. We kind of go through different aspects of that. So we will not go through everything. You probably did not expect that to happen in a 1-hour webinar anyways, right? But we kind of pick some of the top things that will give you concrete benefits when you implement those on an IBMI, right? Good, so we're using these, right? First of all, you want to improve authentication. Doing so is also known as always verify or trust but verify. Right? This is looking at things like two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication and authentication after an initial entry. So after you have signed on, you may be asked to authenticate again for extra security. Okay. And the other area we look at is to improve authorization. And the big topic there is to apply the principle of least privilege, right? And some of you may assume why, of course, that goes without saying. That is how these things should always be done. You're familiar with that. Trust me when I say it's not always done like that. It's actually rarely done like that. Yeah, that's what we see in working with many, many customers that we are happy to have platform. So what that means, you probably can guess it. You only want to give a user or process access to something. That's what we're talking about authorization. If there is a good business reason to do so, right? So example, the payroll folks need access to the payroll data. That they don't need the capability to manage user profiles, for instance, or system values. Conversely, the system admins need to be able to manage security, but they do not need access to the payroll data. Leaving alone the fact that they typically have that, we're talking about how things should be, right? Now, when I talk about reasons, I mean good business reasons. I don't mean my application only works if everybody has all object and job control and service. These are things that we have encountered, okay? That's not a business reason, that is a design error that should be rectified. Okay, end of sermon. Authorization, all things can be granted through object authority, special authority, group profile membership, exit program, and so on. So there are different authorization mechanisms on the IBMI. Network segmentation, right? That is actually taking the same principle of authorization, right? Controlled authorization, applying it to communications between systems. Which system should be able to have which communications with which other system? So do you want this system to speak to the other system through the SQL server interface, or through the FTP interface, or through the file server, right? What have you? Ultimately, what that boils down to is which system should be able to effect which actions, okay, performed under which user profile on which other systems. It goes back to authorization. Yeah. Okay, George, do you want to take this one here? Nice quotes I have here.
Sure, and a lot of that reflects back to that complexity that we saw in that slide earlier from the DoD. But compliance regimes, they don't say zero trust, but they will say things like implement policies that limit physical virtual access and data, what is required to legitimate and approved functions and activities. And we see those in a lot of the regulations, the CMMC and the 800-171 and all that alphabet soup of stuff that comes out. So they don't say zero trust, but they're actually building some of the foundations in there. And the measures shall include the following: security and networks, access control policies, multi-factor authentication, or continuous authentication solutions. Kind of one of the key things that we're seeing in the zero trust that I'm seeing implemented out there is, I'll call them attributes of data. What are we trying to protect? We're really trying to protect the data, and we need to build those shells around the data to effect those rules. And zero trust is saying, well, we don't trust you, even though we know you might be safe. You've got to actually prove it, and then we need authorization tools that say you have the correct attributes today to access this piece of data. So the zero trust is not just giving the keys to the door and you've authenticated yourself. Think of it as a multi-secure facility where you got to get in through the front door. You need your pass to get in, and they may have biometrics to get into a particular room to go look at certain information or access certain pieces of information. But the regulations they just define more processes than actually how to do it. So that's what I'm seeing out there in the field right now.
Yeah, thank you for that, George. I love that comparison. Right before, I was kind of saying, oh, this sort of picture that we have of the physical security, it's all in one building that belongs to the company. That is no longer sort of current. But actually, what you just said is a good counterexample, right? You have a key, let's say, to the front door of a building, and then you go in there. You may not have a key to all the rooms in the building, just to some of them, right? And on purpose, you will only be given access to stuff that you need. Yeah, I love that. Very good. Okay, so I think you're probably all wondering, what about the IBMI, right? This is all kind of abstract and makes sense, but what can we do on the IBMI? Let's get more concrete. Okay, so let's do that. Now, okay, now IBMI security is frequently neglected, and trust us, we know. We run the annual State of the IBMI security study. I've been doing that for a long time, based on data provided by organizations that use our IBMI security scan. Right? So it's actual data. We are happy a bit cheered on by the fact that people are asking about this more. Right? So we see more interest in improving security on IBMI. Okay. Now, zero trust is a way to help you with achieving better security, right? In the face of lack of IBMI staff, right? Or generally speaking, also lack of security on IBMI. In the face of cost pressures, in the face of ransomware that could and has, in fact, in the past, encrypted files on the IBMI, in the face of nation-state hackers, compliance requirements from different sides, right? So zero trust can help on these fronts. I'm not saying it's a panacea that will just magically make things better, but if you start on this road, you'll see actual concrete security improvements, right? Now, application. So the principles zero trust can, in principle, be principles that, in principle, right? So can be applied to any operating system, right? Maybe not the operating system that runs your expensive coffee maker, but anything that's a real operating system. Yes, they can be applied to that. Well, now that I think about it, maybe even the coffee maker as an aside. Now, we'll be using the key principles and apply them to some example IBMI security controls, right? We'll be looking at tools, built-in tools that ship with the operating system, solutions provided by Fortra for security, and we'll also talk about what are some of the processes that you can use to improve security through zero trust approach, right? Are you ready? Good. Now, before we continue, I'll do a very brief poll with you. All right, and the poll is, let me try and bring that up here, whether your organization is already implementing zero trust, but outside of IBMI. Is that something that your organization is doing? So you are hopefully seeing the poll. Yes, the votes are coming in. Yep, and we have a few more seconds before I close the poll. So I hope you're all clicking away like mad. You like that? Good. Now share the results after the polling is done. And what I'm expecting to see is that, yeah, there's already some interest, some mentioning of the zero trust outside of the IBM world in your organization. Right. Okay, and I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And closed. And let's see if I can share this now. Right. Just a question to Elizabeth. I'm hoping that this is visible now. If not, do let me know, please. Right. But I'm hoping that it is visible. Excellent. Good.
Yeah,
So
I can see it.
perfect. Right. So top response, yes, somewhat. Right. And then next one would be yes, we are already invested. So we are at some point in the implementation of Zero Trust outside of the IBM in our organization. That's cool. All right. We do see that there is some interest. That's like roughly 1/4. Okay. And then for the 9% where it's not a topic yet, hopefully this presentation, this webinar will give you some ammunition, for lack of a more peaceful term, that will help you to bring this, make this a topic, put it up on the board, right? And yes, we zero trust everything is something I put on there just to have something that shows 0%. I did not really expect anybody to say we zero trust everything. That's cool. Thank you very much. All right. Let's continue. There'll be a second poll later on as well. All right. So let's take a look at some examples here. So let's talk about zero trust and network segmentation. Okay. Now, the main technique that you should use for that on IBM is exit points and exit point based security solutions, right? Exit points can be used to control, to provide authorization as well as logging for different kinds of activities. But one of the focus areas for IBM when they added exit points to the operating system a long, long time ago was to secure network service for FTP, for the database served through SQL, so ODBC, JDBC, remote command, and so on, right? And exit points are technical means to achieve control, to achieve authorization, logging, that kind of thing, right? Exit points work for the most part at the higher level of the protocol stack, right? We're talking things like FTP commands, SQL statements, mostly not network packets, though there are some socket exit points that could be leveraged for that, right? And the exit point solutions that I have in mind are solutions that are software-based and run on the IBM I. Okay, that's where the exit points actually physically sit. You can optionally combine those with a firewall, what's called an internal segmentation firewall. It's a firewall specialized at doing internal network segmentation, right? There, the job of the firewall is to do the stuff at the lower levels of the protocol, like ports and IP addresses, basically, right? Now you can also do that on the IBM I, but if you have very heavy traffic, it would probably be better to have that lower level stuff be handled by a dedicated firewall and then leave the higher level stuff to the exit point solution, right? Those solutions can be quite fine-grained in the authorization decisions that they make, right? They're typically rule-based, so you define the rules of what should be authorized, what should not. And our top solution for that is PowerTech Exit Point Manager for IBM I. I'm guessing some of you already are familiar with that solution, which is used by quite a number of customers. I'm happy to say it's our most popular product in the PowerTech range of cybersecurity solutions. And the implementation process is as follows, right? You activate the exit programs, and then you observe the actual transactions. Okay, that's always important. You kind of see what's going on because typically you don't have knowledge of everything that goes on in the background between your systems, right? Then you create over time, iteratively, that's the word, allow rules. So you say, this is something I want to allow, right? It will by default allow everything, but you then go in and do a more specific approach, saying I want to allow this, this, and this specifically. And if you've done that for a while, right, you would flip the switch and say, I'm going to block this by default, like a network firewall does. Okay, to make it more concrete, an example. So this is the GUI. We also have a green screen for export manager, and this boils down to saying if it's FTP server incoming remote command, right? Then for this user profile here, if the command starts with qsys delete library, something you don't want, right? Then reject this baby, right? We do not want to allow that. Just an example of how you can have a very fine-grained authorization decision. Yes, we're going to block this baby, right? We're not going to let that happen. Okay, so again, this product can handle both the fine-grained stuff like what you're seeing on screen and the socket exit points. If you have very heavy traffic, the socket stuff, the lower level stuff like IP addresses and ports may be better handled by a dedicated internal segmentation firewall, and the higher level stuff by export manager. All right, good. Here's another very concrete example: execution of commands. Right, controlling the execution of CL commands. And again, there are commercial solutions for controlling the execution of commands. And I have one particular solution in mind, of course, which is PowerTech Command Security, which does exactly that, right? And since I mentioned exit points before, this is also based on exit points, but doesn't require it to be over the network. Also applies to local access, okay? And process in a nutshell, once again, observe the good usage, then identify the commands to which you want to add controls, right? And contextual usage roles using criteria such as what is the user profile, right? Yes, this could block like a QSEC offer from, for instance, running a power down sys. You can make this depend on the day of the week, the current time, the IP address through which the command is executed, depending on the command's arguments, right? Programs on the call stack of the job at that point in time, and so on. So lots of different ways to give you context for a decision to either allow or to block, right, the execution. And with this solution, you can even inject MFA to do a post entry, so post initial sign-on authentication, right? Concrete example, right here we have defined a group called admin PCs with an IP address range, right? So we're saying anything in this range is an admin PC. And we are saying for the specific command power down sys, right? If the command is being run from anything other than an admin PC, reject it. So don't run it unless it's being run from one of the admin PCs identified through the IP address. So that's again a very sort of fine-grained authorization decision we're making here with PowerTech Command Security. Right. Now, we'll come to a topic that we have to discuss. It's not going to be pleasant, but has to be discussed: object authorities, right? Now, on most systems that we've seen, the object authorities are widely open, not on every system, but on a lot of them. That's because, amongst other things, the factory preset for the object authorities is objects default to public change. So everybody can read and use and actually also change your files, data areas, programs, and so on and so forth, right? That is the opposite of the minimum privilege approach that Zero Trust recommends. That's not what you want, okay? How can you even start to make sense of that? Well, there are IBM authority-related commands you can use: added object authority, display object authority, grant object authority, right? There's IBM object auditing and authority collection to show you which profiles are actually accessing, using or changing whatever an object. So you can do that for individual objects. And you also have commercial solutions for creating reports on object authorities. The one I have in mind here is PowerTech Compliance Monitor for IBM, which is a security reporting solution. Okay. Process number one: change the system default setting for the public authority. That's the system value. Use authority collection or object auditing to determine the required authority for specific objects, and then adjust authorities and default object authority settings, which is something you define at the library and IFS directory level. This process will take some time, right? We do offer services around this, so we can support you with that. And in order to reduce our stress a little bit, nobody gets those authorities right 100% immediately or even in the long term, but it is definitely something worth improving to make sure you're following a more focused approach when granting object authorities. Okay, and as I like to say, thou shalt not hand out special authorities like candy, right? This plays into the fact that the best object authority assignment is going to be used as if every profile has all object. Again, something we see that there are too many profiles that have the all object special authority, right? Example, does your payroll team need to have all object or SegAdam or service? I think you know the answer to that one, right? If there's no business reason, don't, okay? More generally about special authorities, each of them comes with a risk of its own. Right? All object, I think that's clear. Audit can turn off the security logging. IO sysconfig, wow, you can turn off the disk drives, you can end TCP service, or you can bring down the entire TCP, right? Job control can, any profile that has that can just bring down your line of business application, right? Is that a superpower that you want to grant your normal users? You may want to have a think about that, right? Just general common sense once you've seen it written out on a page. And tools for that: solutions to create reports of and to score user profiles based on their special authorities. Again, PowerTech Compliance Monitor helps with that, right? And do take into account, which Compliance Monitor does, inherited special authorities. So authorities that your user profile will be able to wield by virtue of being a member in a group profile or supplemental profile, right? Do use IBM authority collection to see who is getting access to objects through having an object. Okay, and then the process would be regularly run reports, very carefully remove the special authorities, test. If a specific application requires many user profiles as special authorities, try to get the application updated. If it's in-house, or update the product or speak to the vendor, that's not a good state. Going back to, if your application requires you to have all object to do your normal non-admin related work, then that's a design problem, right? Again, we can assist. We have a dedicated service offering for that. Right, enough with the profiles and objects. Let's talk about something that is close to the heart of, I know, you, which is data in DB2. There's lots of juicy data there. Would be a shame if something were to happen to that data, wouldn't it? Okay, so we'll talk first about something that Fortra is not selling. That's part of DB2, right? And that's called RCAC, short for row and column access control, right? That's an additional authorization mechanism for access to DB2 data, which works in addition to object authority. And technically, how you set that up is through specific SQL statements, but there are special commands to do that. You do need an installable option, which is called DB2 Advanced Data Security for I, and that enables RCAC. It's free, right? It just comes with the OS. You just have to turn it on. Great stuff, right? Process, investigate the access that's required, and then cast that into RCAC rules. It's a much underused thing, but it's beautiful. Scott Forsey did a presentation of that, for instance, on, I think, a number of common events. Yeah, so this is a good thing to have. But on the downside, it's essentially a display filter, right? The data behind that is stored without encryption. So there is a display filter, but the data is actually not encrypted in any way, right? So the next step up from RCAC is encrypting the data in DB2. Okay. Now, there are technical mechanisms that allow you to encrypt data automatically when it's entered or modified, and to decrypt it automatically when an authorized user, right, back to authorization, requests it. And if an unauthorized user requests the data, well, they just get to see a masked value, star, 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 XXX, right? That can be made independent from whether that profile has all object or not. And in IBM i 7.1, IBM added a scaffolding like infrastructure for that kind of functionality, which is called field procedures, right? But they didn't actually implement encryption for that. Right? That is just like one thing that you need for that. So a solution that will provide that functionality to you, that uses the field procedures, is PowerTech encryption for IBM i, right? And I've done a number of implementations of that. Process for this is you identify your sensitive fields that need extra protection. You identify the users that you will want to have access to that based on, right, a business requirement. Then you turn on the automatic encryption, decryption, masking process. You sit back and relax. It just sits there humming in the background. Okay. It's a great tool for compliance, right? If somebody says we need to have encryption on this database stuff, right, then this is a godsend. And with many customers very happily using PowerTech encryption for exactly this purpose here, right? Time-wise, I think I'll speed up a little bit. So just briefly about the shared IFS directory. So opening something up through net server, that's what it usually is, right? So you can view things from your PC. To make it short, don't share the root directory, right? Because that's, you know, giving a wide piece of access to everything. Right? Only share parts of the IFS where there's a business reason to share it. Don't share everything just for convenience. Make the shares read-only wherever that makes sense. Okay. You can use authorization lists to secure the qsys.lib file system, which is the IFS representation of your native file system with the libraries. Okay. And you can even secure net server shares if you're on IBM i 7.5. It's a good idea there. Plus the usual stuff. Object authority has to be managed. Use all objects sparingly, and you can also use an exit point security solution, such as PowerTech Exit Point Manager, to control access to that. Right, and then I mentioned this briefly previously, importance of ransomware for IBM i. Right, and here's a typical scenario. The root directory is shared through net server, meaning all of the IFS. Right? The IFS is set up as a network drive on some PCs, or mounted drive in Linux. And the ransomware infects and runs on a PC Linux, and it encrypts all files that it can get its hands on, right? Because the files are on a network drive, the ransomware will then proceed, right, through the net server to encrypt all the files on the IBM i and make them unusable. And then there will be tears, okay? That's not something you want to happen. We've had customers report this happening, and they were truly not happy about this. So to protect against that, there is anti-ransomware functionality built into PowerTech Enterprise for IBM i, right, that can specifically detect ransomware access and block it. So consider that. Right. Let's see, how are we doing for time? We are getting to the ends of it. 2FA, MFA, I'm sure that you've heard these, so I'll be relatively brief about these. With PowerTech multi-factor authentication, you can add a second authentication factor to various protocols on the IBM i, to the green screen sign-on, to FTP, to ODBC, and you can also integrate through an API use of 2FA in your applications, assuming you have controlled the source code, of course, right? And if you're looking for this kind of solution, I give you a tip: look for something that has support for Radius, which in essence is an adapter for third-party authentication. So if you have like an Okta, Radius support allows you to plug into that, which multi-factor authentication, the product, does have that. Okay, right. So general recommendation: reporting functionality for any of the above is your friend. So things like reports on object authorities, reports on the network-based activity that you see through exit points. This allows you to track progress, to see changes in the activity that's happening, right? You do want to create a process to review those reports regularly. That should be part of your road towards Zero Trust. Yeah, that's general advice. That's not even specific to Zero Trust or even security. You can use that in many places, right? And for security on IBMI, Compliance Monitor again can help with creating those reports. All right. Now we talk about things you want to avoid. As I said, this is a short section, so you have been given some examples of the specific things you can do on the IBMI. Let's talk about what you don't want to do. Right. So the perfect Zero Trust implementation is out there. It is not, right? So don't worry if you cannot achieve 100% Zero Trust. Nobody is ever going to do that. It's not that kind of thing. It's like a stretch goal, okay? Don't wonder how to perform what in the Zero Trust literature is referred to as continuous authentication, right? There is no such thing as continuous authentication, right? All it means is more and post-entry authentication. So authenticate more often, right? Like when you want to execute a dangerous command, require 2FA, but there is no such thing as an ongoing. Or if it were, you wouldn't be able to work. So just keep that in mind. Don't try to secure everything at once, right? You want to prioritize things or you will end up going nowhere fast, right? So identify the most sensitive data and functionalities, protect those, and then kind of proceed from there. Above all, be pragmatic with what you can achieve. You want to start somewhere, have a success, build on that, carry on. Right. See, told you it was a short section. Okay. Now, I won't go through all of this. This will be made available to you. So again, this is listing solutions I mentioned, plus Identity Manager for identity management, which we didn't really go into, but these are solutions that are trusted and used to their benefit by thousands of customers worldwide. Very happy about that. We're hoping that we can, of course, convince more people, right? But these products will help you, as our security service also can do. So we have deep knowledge of the IBMI from the security angle. We have familiarity with demanding environments that customers run and many years of experience. And we offer services at different levels, all the way from sort of an overview security scan to a full security architecture design. We can support you on all of those levels. So we can assist you on the road to Zero Trust. Right now, I'll pass to George to talk about things that we can do off the IBMI, and I'm doing that because, but if you want to protect the data and applications that are on the IBMI, you should also protect the other systems, right? These are the systems that are not IBMI, but then can connect to it and that are under your control. And we offer solutions for that too. So I'll pass to you, George, if you would do us the honor.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not an island within an organization. I mean, Zero Trust is, the model and the architecture needs to be deployed across the entire organization. It's kind of interesting because I work a lot on the data protection side. So I'm file centric, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And we look at some of the tools that we have for things like data leak protection, DLPs, and it's all about files moving around organically within the organization. And what's made it more complex is now we've got everybody working remotely. So files are leaving the organization. You're working on a spreadsheet here in your laptop at home on your home office and things like that. So we need to look at it holistically, and Zero Trust starts to take a play in that. On the DLP side of the fence, when you use that to contrast with the zero trust model. When I'm looking at logs and we're monitoring user activity and things like that, and we're catching up on things. User tried to put a sensitive file onto a USB drive and walk out the door of the organization, or print some content out, or email it out, or egress it in some shape or form. Well, I'd like to think zero trust will put us out of business in that area, because how did that user get access to it in the first place to start doing those nefarious things? It's because they were trusted inside the organization. They managed to get in there and get through. That kind of brings to the topic of sensitivity of the material you're dealing with, and it's not just hardening your hardware and the operating systems and things like that. The whole reason we're in business is to create data, and the data is used by organizations to perform business functions and hopefully generate money. That's kind of why we do all this.
Yeah. But and for those folks who haven't come across the terms briefly, DLP, data loss prevention, so trying to prevent your precious data from leaving the company in a way that's not expected. Yep.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And when we start looking at data, I think you had a slide back there, Kurt, is understanding the sensitivity of the data. Where does that fit into your zero trust model? Because I see a lot of organizations on the commercial side. We've got public, internal, confidential, restricted information that's in files. Those files could be Word documents, could even be emails that are leaving the organization. But that's sort of one attribute or one piece of that puzzle. Who actually needs access to that restricted information? And this is where zero trust starts to come into play with different attributes. Maybe you don't need access to it all the time, but you may need it once a month because you're doing end of job processing or end of month processing jobs and things like that. Do you need it the other 30 days of the month or 29, depending on what month it is? Probably not. So we've got multiple attributes. And when I think of that, it's not just sensitivity. There's some good zero trust architecture models out there. There's a lot of documentation and articles that are available out on the internet that describe things like control planes and policy decision points and all that sort of good stuff. And when I started looking at that, and we start to take in numerous attributes, why should I give George access to this data or this system or things like that? It can rapidly get pretty complex, especially with a large multinational or even a large national corporation with so many branches and things like that. And kind of the scary thought that came into it is, hey, how are we going to manage those, use access control lists or attributes to make that decision that we would in the zero trust model? And potentially that's an area for AI. AI can look at behaviors and see what's going on in real time, who's trying to do what, who usually does these activities, are they stepping outside? And to Kurt's point, there's no one zero trust solution that you plug in to there. So who have I been working with zero trust? Large financial institutions. That's where I first came across the request on what can you guys do in the lines of zero trust. That was probably 5 or 6 years ago. A lot of 3-letter agencies within the government have got labs set up, and what they're all doing in these labs, large government contractors and suppliers and large tech industry players out there. So in their labs, what they're doing is they're bringing in best of breed components to manage some of those elements that we saw in that really complex slide that Kurt had put up there, and to start to meld them together into an overarching solution, because we touch on so many disciplines within an organization. Obviously we're focused on IBM here, but there's a whole plethora of different infrastructure platforms and considerations that need to be made. What have we seen in those labs? So I work in, I'll say I work with Titus. We do the data sensitivity part. We assign those attributes. It's not just sensitivity. There can be all sorts of things that are associated. But the lessons learned, data sensitivity is critical. Multiple attributes needed to be used to determine who gets access to that data. And without knowing how sensitive your data is, it's like trying to be the bodyguard to the invisible man. You don't know what you're protecting and how you should. So multiple vendors are working together to provide that next solution. Kurt, you can move on to the next slide, please.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And where can Fortra help? Well, we've kind of looked at the pillars of zero trust. You'll hear that discussed a lot: the users, devices, application, data, network. And this is just a quick snapshot of some of the tools that or products that we have within the Fortra suite, and where they kind of plug into and can assist in that zero trust security model. And so just to kind of give you a flavor of what's out there.
Yep, and don't worry, there will not be tests on this. That's not what the second poll is about. Right. Thank you very much, George. I'll grab it from you here. So in summary, right, zero trust, a set of principles that can be applied to improve security, principally on any operating system, and that definitely does include the IBMI. Application to IBMI includes multiple aspects: special authorities, MFA or 2FA, encryption, access point-based security for the network control, and so on. The general two items I'd like you to focus on for a realistically successful implementation is to improve authentication authorization. Keep those as the sort of lighthouses, right, in memory. Tools that you can leverage, right, include both built-in and third-party tools. Use reporting to track your progress and should include in your processes something that is, regular report review. Remember that the goal is not perfection, but concrete improvements to the IBMI security. And also, you should always be aware that to protect your IBMI, right, you need to take measures on the IBMI, but also on the systems in front of it, right, that would connect to it. That will help you protect the data and the applications on the IBMI. We are, of course, here to assist you on the road to zero trust. No big surprise there. And what I'd like to ask of you at this point is the second poll. So are you planning on working towards zero trust on IBMI? So please poll away, right? Consciously, we are putting it into these so very careful terms, right? Do you want to do something? I'm not saying do you already have a plan or do you have budget? No, it's, do you want to do something? So that is what we're looking to do here. Okay, and the answers are coming in fast and furious like that, right? Okay, we give a few more seconds. But already I can see that there is interest in zero trust. Very good. Quite happy to see that. And yes, it's true. The already 100% zero trust is more there. Or, well, who knows, right? Could have been that you're already in the perfect state and have achieved zero trust nirvana, but not so likely. Okay, all right. I'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. And let me share the results too. So 35%, maybe 12% probably, 47% have drunk the zero trust Kool-Aid, and yes, you want to go ahead with it. Very good. Excellent, like to see that. 6% nope. Oh, come on. Who was that? Was that you, Tracy? I think I saw that there. Okay, so thank you for the feedback on that. Very interesting. I'm glad to see there is interest because I think this will actually make a difference for IBMI shops, right? Don't think we actually have time for the questions today, which I'm apologizing for. I probably dragged on for too long. So what we do is we'll make sure to reply to your questions after today's session. And I would just like to add that from my side and from George's side, and also from the lady working for us in the background very diligently, very well, Elizabeth, thank you all very much. We much appreciate your interest. We hope we have helped you to realize there are actually gains to be made with security in IBMI. You have a wonderful day and let us know if we can help you. Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks.